All right, everybody, thank you for being here today. My name is Tara Fisher. I'm a fifth-year graduate student here at GSBS, and I'm happy to introduce Bill Lindstaedt, who is coming here today. He's the Assistant Vice Chancellor at UCSF and has numerous years of experience in career development and guiding PhD-level students and postdocs in their career choices. He's also the co-author of My IDP, a very useful career development tool, which I am very familiar with here at GSBS. He is here to talk to us today about the best approaches and strategies to securing a faculty position in academia in the morning, and also giving another workshop here about the biotech industry and positions in the biotech industry in the afternoon. And we'd like to thank him for joining us in the heat here in Houston, all the way from San Francisco. I'm sure it's quite a change.
It's pretty different.
But we'd like to thank the MD Anderson Postdoctoral Association, AWIS, and Gulf Coast Houston for bringing him here today to discuss with us all of these opportunities. So thank you so much, and without further ado.
Thanks, Tara. Can you guys hear me in the back? It's okay. Thank you for the introduction. It is definitely different than San Francisco, where you put a jacket on when you go outside in the summer. And here, I wish I'd brought a jacket for inside today. But thank you for the introduction. Thanks to Sina and all the groups that brought me in. It's a pleasure to be here. And this morning, we're going to be talking about faculty, applying for faculty positions. And you'll notice from my title and my name that I don't have a PhD. I have not done my own faculty job search. When I put this workshop together, my colleague Cynthia Furman and I interviewed lots of faculty around the country who had been on search committees, found out how search committees operate, what happens kind of behind the closed doors when they're reviewing applications. And as we were interviewing people, we realized that after having seen one-on-one, hundreds of postdocs and graduate students who have moved on to various academic positions, we realized that we had kind of brought a different perspective to it than a faculty member did. So what this is kind of the whole accumulation of the wisdom of people who have gone before you. And Cynthia and I were just the collectors of that wisdom as we were talking to students one-on-one and postdocs one-on-one, and we saw what works for them. And so we combined all that knowledge with what we learned from faculty members and put this workshop together. So that's why I feel qualified to speak about what works on the academic job market, even though I've never done it myself. So this is lots of wisdom from those postdocs and students who have gone before you. And what we're going to talk about first is sort of how the job search process works, a little bit about the academic job market in the U.S., what happens on search committees and what the sequence of events looks like when people apply for faculty positions. We'll talk about what goes into a faculty application package, and then talk a little bit more specifically about cover letters and CVs. And then I'm going to pass out some real samples of people who have been on the job market from our office that we worked with at UCSF, and have a simulated search committee exercise for you. And I've done this workshop maybe 50 times or more, and everyone always says that's definitely the most valuable piece of the workshop, is because we're asking you to kind of turn the tables on the process, and instead of thinking like an applicant, take a look at some applications as if you were a faculty member on a search committee trying to decide which applicant was best when you have a very limited amount of time because there are so many applicants. And that seems to be a very instructive exercise, so I think you'll really appreciate that. And then we'll come back to sort of lecture format, talk a little bit about tailoring your documents, and then move to research statements, teaching statements, and letters of recommendation. And we'll finish that about 11 o'clock, and then the 11 to 12 hour is about what happens in the faculty, the startup negotiation process, how as an applicant you can ask for what you want from the department chair that you're working with, and also I have some samples for that as well, some sample startup packages. So lots of information this morning. My favorite way of presenting is just if you have questions, raise your hand and ask them along the way. You don't have to wait to the end, and I'll make sure we finish on time anyway. So just to check, how many people are postdocs? Awesome. And graduate students? Faculty members looking for jobs? Nobody? Okay, nobody wants to raise their hand on that one. All right, great. So we'll get started. What I wanted to do first is talk a little bit about the academic job market in the U.S. And I have several purposes for this slide that has lots of numbers on it. It comes from the Carnegie classification, which I'll say more about in a moment on the next slide. But I put this information up to demonstrate what the landscape of the job market looks like. And you'll see that there's close to 4,000 colleges and universities in the country. About 261, or about 8%, are what people call R1 universities. And this is like big research universities like where you're at now. Actually, some of the units, some of the institutions that you're involved with here might come under the specialized institutions, medical schools and centers. But big research universities, big research powerhouses take up only about 8% of the job market. So the reason I put this information up, that piece of the information up, is because if you say, I only want to work at a big research powerhouse, you're eliminating 92% of the possible types of institutions where you might work. On the other hand, if you look at where biomedical scientists are employed, more than half of the academic biomedical scientists in the country are employed at that 8% of the institutions. So a few places hire a lot of people. But I think it's worth considering, at least, what it's like to work at a master's college or university. There are about 600 of those in the country. And in California, we have a big state university system where they don't offer PhD degrees. So if you got a job at SF State or San Jose State or the Cal State East Bay, you would have master's students in your lab, undergraduates in your lab, but no PhDs and no postdocs. So very different kind of place to do research, and yet you're expected to get grants and teach and do research at a place like that. Might be different types of grants than your PI's R01s, for example, but still a place where you have to combine teaching and research. There's about 600 baccalaureate colleges. People call them PUI, for primarily undergraduate institutions, and those tend to be like liberal arts colleges where they probably get very motivated students. They're tuition-driven institutions, so your salary is not dependent on grants often. It's dependent on your teaching skills and teaching quality. And then associates colleges, there are many of those. These are places that give 2-year degrees where everything that you do as a faculty member would be based on your teaching. So another reason for putting this information up is the type of materials that you prepare and the type of I guess the qualities they look for, the things that are rewarded in the promotion and tenure process are going to be very different at these different places. And so if you put together one application package, I've talked to many people who did this, I'm on the job market, I'm going to blast out as many applications as I can to as many types of institutions as I can, and I'm going to send everybody the same package. And you can see how that would be a misfire if you sent your very research-focused application package to a master's granting institution where they're going to want to see something about your teaching and your research, and how you would do that with not just postdocs and PhD students. So I think this is really useful information to be taking into your sort of pre-job search research. And one of the things I think everybody should do is spend some time on the Carnegie classifications website. And this is in the slide deck that Angela Green passed out already. And if you really dig into the data there, you'd be able to see how if you're applying for a job at SF State and Cal State East Bay, even though they're master's granting institutions, if you start looking at how their research is prioritized, you'd see that you should probably focus on your research more at SF State than at Cal State East Bay, even though they're the same general classification. So really detailed information about how they balance their student types as well as their research dollars. Also, I've seen people use the Carnegie classifications very effectively if they're looking for sort of geographically focused job searches. So this has actually happened with one of our recent postdocs. His spouse got a job at a university in New York City, and he was like, I'm going to have to follow her, so let me find out all the different places in New York City that I could work at. I've heard of a couple big research places, but there's probably a lot more, and so it was useful for him to do a geographic focus search. And then there's a tool that we're developing at UCSF called the Academic Career Readiness Assessment. And this is a good tool for helping you answer what search committees are looking for at different types of universities. Research teaching universities, research-only universities. And I won't go into a lot of detail on it because you can just Google, or you can just look at career.ucsf.edu/ACRA, and you'll see that for a research-intensive institution, this is one page from this multi-page document, we break down how faculty view application packages into several, I think there's almost a dozen different dimensions: independence, vision, how weighted your recommendations are, your publications, and we have 4 different levels for each of the dimensions that we feature. And you can see that at a research powerhouse place, the average was about level 3 for publications, where it says this person's produced, first author papers in high impacts in their field, but not necessarily Cell, Nature, or Science. So we got this information from interviewing a few dozen faculty members around the country who had been on search committees and started trying to categorize what they look for and what level they are searching for when they're looking at applications. So this could be really helpful also. And this surprised a lot of people that when we went into this research, we thought if you're at a research powerhouse, everybody wants to see a Cell, Science, Nature paper. And we got what we got is a much more nuanced balance from these folks. So, on average, it was institutions didn't require top journal, but they did require that you be prepared to talk about how independent you'll be, regardless of how high impact your papers were. And there's all these other dimensions. So really useful information to start thinking about what you have to prepare and how you have to market yourself. Questions about any of that so far?
Does the tool also...
Oh, I can repeat the question too.
I'll just yell. Does the tool allow you to input your own documents? For example, a cover letter, and then say, maybe you should be highlighting this more, or analyze what the text, say how it would fall on the scale? Great question.
No, it's designed, so the question is, does this tool allow you to sort of, it's all paper right now, so you can't, we're trying to find some money that would make it do that though, which would be you put your own self-rating in and it sort of matches you, but right now, you have to sort of figure out where you are on each of these spectra. Great. Anything else? We'll move on. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the job search calendar. So I think before someone starts being on the job market, you should do this research. Go use this ACRA tool. Go to the Carnegie classifications. Read as much as you can in the Chronicle of Higher Education or Science Careers with their academic job toolkits to figure out what materials do I have to produce, when will I have to produce them, what message should I send about myself. And then once you say, okay, I'm going to start looking for jobs this year, how does the calendar actually work? And typically, we see most of our postdocs who are on the faculty job market beginning to look for applications about now. So you'll see job postings, beginning to look for job postings now. You'll see usually in the fall and late summer, institutions are starting to post job openings that are going to come up. And this is because most institutions have a budget year that goes from July 1 through June 30, and so as the new faculty position comes on, it gets approved at the time the calendar year starts, or the budget year starts, and they post these positions, assemble a search committee, people start applying in the fall, and then late fall, early spring, during the winter, early spring, people are out interviewing, and finally, usually late winter, early spring, on into the late spring, we're seeing people with job offers that they're negotiating. A lot of folks that I talk to have different approaches, and it seems like there's different myths out there about how you should apply for jobs. What seems to be most effective is very carefully tailoring job application materials and spending a lot of time getting the perfect package for very select institutions that you feel like you're the best fit at. So we call that the rifle approach, where you're sort of laser focusing on a few institutions. Some people go a little broader also and have like a second tier application process. I'm not sure I'm a great fit for the research and teaching priorities of this position, but I'm going to send a job application anyhow. Maybe I spend less time on that. What doesn't seem to work is I'm going to apply for every job that says they need a PhD and send the same materials to everything. It might seem like it's faster, but it doesn't seem to work as well. So manage your time, take lots of time to carefully tailor your materials, and that's really what the rest of this workshop is about. So what you could be doing now is doing your research, thinking about what types of institutions to apply for, put your materials together so that when these job applications come out in the fall, you'll be ready. And then the question comes, where do I find job postings? So an institution is going to hire a new faculty member. Where would I see that? There's nothing really magic about this. If you come to the afternoon workshops in biotech jobs, we're talking about biotech jobs, sometimes that's a little trickier to find those job openings. But most institutions are required to post all their positions. And so you'll see the high research places posting in major journals or specialty journals. Teaching-focused positions are almost, most institutions would post them in the Chronicle of Higher Education, which is kind of like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal of the university world. Sometimes big research institutions and comprehensive universities will also post in the Chronicle, but you don't see that many research jobs from places like UCSF in the Chronicle. Many states' community college systems have one big job posting website if you wanted to teach at a community college. I think this is a website that a lot of people don't know about that's super helpful, the Higher Education Recruitment Consortium. And this is, for example, there's a Greater Texas HERC, Higher Education Recruitment Consortium. Super useful for people who are doing like two-body searches. So if you have a trailing spouse who's going to be going with you, or you're going to be going with that person, you could find one of 13 regions in the country that have all banded together for all of their institutions. And within, however they define Greater Texas, they don't create this HERC. The HERC organization won't allow them to create it until every institution that's defined in that region formally agrees to cross-post all of their jobs. So the reason this is nice for two-body search is because if your spouse or partner is getting a job in the Texas area, you could find all the other institutions' job postings by discipline, by function, so faculty or administration, that kind of stuff, on this website. Super helpful, especially for doing these geographically focused searches. Just another example, there's a sort of Jersey, Philadelphia area one. And then the question becomes, okay, I know as much as I possibly can about the job market and how I'm going to approach it and how I'm going to tailor my materials and what kind of focus I'm going to put on myself. What kind of materials do I actually have to create? So we did a little informal survey and read 35 or 40 job postings for life science faculty positions. And we found that, as you might expect, all of them asked for CV, cover letter, or letter of application, it might have been called. And I think all except one, I think there were 35 that we read, all except one said we want letters of reference or a list of references. Almost all of them, except for the teaching-focused ones only, ask for some kind of a statement about your research. What do you want to do, or what's your history been? And most of them, even the teaching, the research powerhouse kind of places, also asked for some sort of a teaching statement. I was especially interested to see that. So what you should prepare if you're like, okay, I'm getting ready to blast my job market materials out, get your CV and cover letter together, your research statement, your teaching statement, and make sure you're starting to canvass your potential recommenders to make sure you're going to get great letters and great references. So we'll talk about each one of these documents and letters of recommendation before we're finished here. Uh-huh.
Have you seen in the searches, especially for teaching-focused institutions, a letter of professional development instead of a research statement, and like what the difference is between those two documents?
So a letter of professional development as part of your application package?
Yeah, or
I
like a
haven't.
statement of professional development.
I have not seen that. Check with me afterwards and we can talk about what you might put in there. One thing I have seen more recently, and is a new requirement, I think, in all state-funded institutions in California, and I see it in lots of other institutions, is a diversity statement, which I have one slide, I don't know if we'll get to that, but that seems to be more common, which is either in your teaching statement, at least in your teaching statement, or a separate document in particular, you need to talk about how you're prepared to teach people from different backgrounds and people who have different learning styles. And so taking a pedagogy class and getting some education about education is really useful for people on the job market. This is even if you're going to apply for a place where you think you'll do a minimum of teaching. Any other questions? Okay, great. And then the next question a lot of people ask is, what actually happens with these materials? I'm going to send my application in. What happens to it? Typically, you'll send your application materials to an administrator in a department who's coordinating the search. And that person, especially if the materials are, if the application process requests letters of recommendation and not a list of references, so your letters would be coming in from recommenders separately from your application package. You send your CV, cover letter, teaching statement, research statement, whatever else is required, and that person sits with your documents until everything is complete. So that means if you have 3 letters of recommendation coming and one of your faculty members who's recommending you is sitting on that, your application might never get reviewed. So that's not always true, but that may be the way the department runs their search. We're not going to forward your application to the search committee members until everything's there. So super important to follow up with your recommenders to make sure they get that information. And then what most of the faculty members we talked to said was we get 300 applications for a faculty position. The administrator divides those up by the members of the search committee, and we each read a stack, and then we come to a committee meeting where we try to come to consensus on who will get the interviews. So each person kind of comes with their favorite candidates that might have come just from reading the applications or might have come because they got calls from your faculty members who are recommending you, and that helps highlight your application. But when they're just reading the documents alone, what they told us was they tend to kind of skim almost in this order. They may not read all of any of the documents. They may not even look at some of the documents, they tell us, which surprised us a lot. So a couple faculty members told us, I don't actually even read the research statement. This is somebody from UCSF, actually. She said, I don't read the research statement until I'm about to interview that person. So we're going to look at the CV for your pedigree. So where have you worked and who have you worked with? And we were told, working with someone that you know, if I'm reading an application and you've worked with someone that I know, even if that person's not super famous or from a top research place, but I respect them, then that's as good as if you came from MD Anderson or UT Health Sciences Center. So pedigree isn't just defined as the name of the institution. They're going to look at how well you fit the research, teaching, or clinical priorities of the position that's been posted, and they'll look at your CV and cover letter for that, although they may be skimming. They're going to read your letters. We were told this is super important for your reputation, ability, collegiality. They'll look at your CV, flip to the back of it where most people put their publication and presentation history, and look at how productive you've been. And that may be all they do in a couple minutes. So when we do our search committee exercise here shortly, I'll give you about 2 minutes to read each application, because that's what most faculty members told us. They get this big stack of stuff from you, and they probably take a couple minutes on it, which doesn't seem like very much, but if you have 50 or 60 applications to read, that's a big chunk of time. Let's see. So you can see how with that little time to read so much material, it's really important how you structure your documents and how you, and that you carefully strategize what message you want to send about yourself. And so we'll talk about that a lot in this workshop. So when people are getting ready to prepare their application materials, and they come in for an appointment with us in our office at UCSF, we generally start with these questions. Before we look at the materials, we ask these questions of the candidate, and it seems like this is something that people should start out with before they spend a lot of time trying to draft their CV, cover letter, et cetera. The two questions are, what are the main factors about your background, your accomplishments, your skill set? What are you bringing to this search process that should make a committee want to talk to you especially? And then, how do you organize your documents so that these items stand out? In the order, how much space you put on your, when you're describing an activity or an experience helps draw attention to it. How you title the different sections of your CV. All of these things can really make a difference when you only have 1 minute to read a CV if you're the faculty member. To give you an example of how this plays out, I was talking to a postdoc who had a K-99 Career Development Award, which this is funding that you can take to your faculty job from your postdoc role. So it's very, very helpful. Plus, it's a good signifier of promise. If people from around the country have read your grant applications and decided you're very competitive, even before you go on the job market. So something you'd really want to highlight. And he had a section on like page 3 of his CV that had it was called Awards and Honors, and it had all of his grants, awards, everything in a giant bulleted list where everything got one line, nothing was highlighted over the other, and he had his several $100,000 award for this K-99 listed with his graduate, the travel grants that he got as a graduate student. And so all those things were equally weighted. And he ended up deciding to pull that out into a separate section that he put on page 1 that was just about his grant writing success, and was able to draw more highlighting to that just by sort of thinking about what difference that makes. By the same token, you should also think, what am I concerned about? What are search committees going to perceive that are my weaknesses? And how might I counter those? So if I don't have a ton of papers and I think my competition will have more papers than I have, maybe there's nothing you can do about that on your CV, but you can sure strategize with your recommenders on how they're going to counter your productivity when they write about you. Right? So thinking about this in advance can be really helpful. So that's a lot about everything you should do before you actually start drafting these documents, right? Once you start writing, let's talk a little bit about CVs and cover letters, and then I'll give you some samples to look at. First of all, CV is Latin, curriculum vitae. It means the course of one's life or career. It's basically everything that, if you look at your PI's CV, basically everything that person's ever done in their whole professional life. And the reason I talk about this is because it seems really common for a candidate to go to their PI and say, hey, I'm going to go on the job market, can I look at your CV, and I'm going to use that as a template. And that's probably a mistake, because the document that person gives you is probably the document they use for their promotion and tenure review process, and it may be completely formatted in a different way that's not helpful for someone who's going on the job market. So, for example, it's probably in chronological order because the promotion and tenure reviews committees want to see, so what you've done from day 1 to the end, and it sort of tells a story that way. But a search committee looking for new faculty, they're going to want to see what have you done most recently and get to see that really easily, because that's probably the most relevant, impressive thing. So you'd want to change things around. You want to probably highlight things in a different order than you might have in a prescribed promotion and tenure package. All that to say, don't make that mistake. Get some samples from people who have been successful on the job market before you recently, and don't use your PI's application materials. The samples that I pass out today are in a little different format. on this website, our office at UCSF, career.ucsf.edu. If you click on PhDs and then academic careers, samples for academic positions are under CVs and cover letters, along with a whole bunch of other materials, research statements, teaching statements, coaching, and samples on these different types of documents. But what you'll see in a lot of the samples is sections of a CV would be sort of your heading. In a lot of countries, for those of you who aren't from the U.S., there's all kinds of information that people put in other countries on their CVs that in the U.S. we just sue people about all this stuff, I guess. So we don't want to know how old you are, or if you're married, or what your health status is. Or maybe we do want to know that, but we're not going to ask in an application material, so probably leave that out. And then your education is usually the next section traditionally, and then you'll see a bunch of experience sections. And I think instead of having one big section for all your professional experience that you've ever done, divide it up into something that's going to be descriptive so that we can clearly see how your research, teaching, mentoring kinds of backgrounds separate themselves out. People sometimes ask, I know I have to describe my teaching experience, but I've never actually taught a classroom setting. Put these together. Probably all of you have done some kind of mentoring in a lab setting, even one-on-one, and so you could sort of put that together so that it's still highlighted and someone can still see that section. Typically, publications and presentations are at the end, but there's no rules to these things, and so if there's a mention that you want to make about a paper that you're really proud of, you could somehow figure out how to get that on page 1, and then perhaps even list it again in your publication section. If the call for applications asks for a list of references rather than letters of reference, most people put those on a separate last page of their CV and title it references. And then I won't go into a whole lot about this. There's a lot of different things you could put in your CV that I've seen. We just got a bunch of people's CVs and sort of went through and pulled out different section headings to put this slide together. One of the things we have seen, though, is sometimes you'll just see there will be a job description posted in your specialty journal, and they'll just say send a CV and letter of application to this, the department chair. Probably, if it's a research-intensive place, you'd probably want to have a section in your CV for what you're going to do in your research, even if it's a paragraph or two only, if the research statement is not asked for. So we did see that a few times that people have, the institution won't say specifically send us a research statement, but you know that all you'll be doing at this place is research. So you'd probably build something like that into both your cover letter and a section of your CV. And then, sort of as we mentioned before, how much space you take with these sections, the order that you build your document can really make a difference depending on the priorities of the institution that you're applying for. For cover letters, they tend to be long descriptive documents. You'll see the samples that we have, a page and a half or even 2 pages in length, and they might be constructed like this. For a research-focused position, the first paragraph might just have a very brief description of yourself, plus where you heard about the job and clearly what you're applying for. And then your research, even though you have a research statement, you'll have some description of your background from a research standpoint and what you plan to do, even in the cover letter. And then how you're going to do teaching as well, if there's some teaching required at this place, and then sort of close the document out. So you want to order this a little bit differently and talk a little bit differently about yourself if you were applying for a teaching-focused position, where you'd have a similar beginning section, and then you'd talk about your teaching. So this is an actual sample that we modified some from Bard College, a place where it's an undergraduate institution, a PUI, primarily undergraduate institution, where research is important, but it's all done with undergrads. And so you'd want to talk a little bit about how you're going to teach using research as well as produce in the lab, and how you would motivate students and be able to do your research with undergrads. So you can see how it's important not to send the same cover letter to every type of position you apply for. So I want to get to the part where we actually pass out some samples. So if you have all those, before you start passing them out, I'm just going to send back an instruction sheet, and we're just going to look at page 1 of the instruction sheet for now. Awesome, thank you. You can pass it.
Both of them?
Both of them. You don't have to pass them out yet, though, because I don't want people to read them. We'll have to look at the instructions first. So I think people get the most out of this exercise when we first take a look at what it is we want you to do. I'm going to read thank you. I'm going to read the instruction sheet for you, which is just this page 1. So we're going to have you first spend some time looking at these documents quietly and marking them up. And I'll give you a couple minutes to read each sample, and then we'll have you assemble in a committee. So the instructions are like this. So congratulations, you've been assigned to be on a search committee. The Jones Foundation has selected you and your colleagues to serve on a search committee for the next visiting professor fellowship funded by this foundation. They annually provide $95,000 salary stipend to a private, primarily undergraduate college to pay for the salary of one outstanding teacher scholar from a nationwide pool. The teacher scholar will then serve as visiting professor at that college's life science or biology department for 1 year. The applicants did not apply for the fellowship, so when you read this, you won't see that they're applying for a fellowship, they're applying for a faculty job. And then the faculty at the colleges sent the applications on to the foundation, your committee, so that you can make a determination of who gets the award. So your assignment then is to take 2.5 minutes to review Satyendra Nath Bose's application and Rembrandt van Ryn's application. So I'll give you a total 5 minutes for both. And as you're reading these, take your pen or pencil, mark up the documents according to who you think should be the best applicant, because then we're going to have you assemble and state your opinions on which person is the best applicant, and you'll have to come to a consensus as a search committee. And as you're reading these, pay attention to these criteria: perceived commitment to teaching at the undergraduate level, perceived ability to engage undergraduates in research, and the perceived excellence in the classroom, as well as the quality of writing in the documents, the clarity and the persuasiveness of the fit for the priorities of this award. Does that sound good? Everybody got that? So we'll pass out 2 samples. Thank you. I'll give you more than that. And the first one that's coming around is from this person, Nath Bose. We'll kind of collect those at the end. Thank you. Let's go back. Great. And the second sample is to Dr. Picasso from Rembrandt. So despite the strange names, these are actual trainees from UCSF who applied for jobs and allowed us to use their documents with, as long as we changed names and sort of anonymized things. So there's 2 things I'll say about these. One is, there's I think in the Nath Bose sample, this was a real person, and she told us when we changed the names and stuff, there were some things that she didn't want out there about herself. So you'll see at the bottom of the cover letter on Nath Bose, it says current future research interest described here. That's something we put in there. We took her, like 1 paragraph about that. So don't ding her for that. And the other thing I'll say about this before I forget is a lot of people say, well, I want to apply for jobs at research institutions. And you gave me teaching applications, this isn't relevant. So this isn't an exercise about the actual research or the actual teaching they've done. It's about how they wrote their documents, and we actually tried to do this with research focused applications once, and everybody got into a big argument about whether this paper was more important than that paper, or, well, this person did that technique, I would have done it differently. So we're like, I think there's a general understanding of what teaching excellence is, and that's why we focused on that, so people wouldn't have fights about your research. But the main point is about the documents and how they're written. So some of you probably started writing already. I'll give you 2.5 minutes to read one of them, and then we'll move to the second one. Okay, time is up for application number 1. Move to whichever one you haven't read, and we'll give you another standard 2.5 minutes. application. And what I'd like for you to do now is turn chairs around or whatever, get into groups of 5 or 6, not more than 6 because it takes too long for everybody to make an opinion. And I'll give you 5 to 10 minutes to come to consensus as a group. Your assignment after you assemble should be select a chair who will then be required to make the committee work and come to consensus. And then that person will report out at the end on why you picked the person that you picked. So as a group, you'll have to pick which person won, and then at the end, we'll sort of take a collective count of which person is going to get the total award. The other thing I'll say about this is if you're not comfortable talking in a group, that's great. You don't have to talk, but at least listen because I think this is the most useful part of this. Okay. So groups of 5 or 6, I'll help you assemble if you need to. 4 is fine also. This might be too big for one group. Maybe somebody can sit in on this a different group. You guys got it? Maybe he can sit in with you guys. Does that work? Awesome. Thank you. Wow, this group's so organized. This group is a very functional committee, I can tell. They're taking notes.
Not just like this is actually what I did. This is the role I played.
You guys done? Yep. A functional committee. All right. Excellent. Okay. Who's the chair? Nice job, Jerry. You guys done? Almost? Pretty much. You guys finished? Functional committee, all done? All right. Do you guys know? One more? Okay. See, you guys are so organized. This is impressive. Taking notes. Excellent. Even with 7 people. Nice. You guys are done. Whew. All right. Is this committee almost done?
We're in agreement.
You are in agreement? Okay. Awesome. Who'd you pick? Which one?
For reasons that I think exemplify the importance of doing a good CD.
That's okay. Are you the chair?
I guess.
Sure. Okay, we'll talk about that. You guys done? You have a favorite? Okay, excellent. Consensus? Has consensus been achieved? No? Okay. Okay, try to finish up in about less than a minute. We'll move on.
I'll keep through it in his cover. Also, it's submitted.
No, it's submitted.
Submitted to, oh, got it, oh, and I cleared Dr.
That was
Okay. Is anybody not ready? We can move on. This is where the committee chairs have to just exert executive authority if their group's not ready. Okay, so what I think we'll do is go around the room, and I'll keep score so that we can see who's in the lead as we go through this. And I bet you'll find that different committees found different things, and different people found different things on the committee, even though you're all obviously all reading the same material. So why don't we start with we'll start with this group here in the front, and if you can say who you selected and something about each applicant or one of the applicants, the reason that you picked it, basically.
Okay. Can you all hear me? All right.
Can you? I think they work.
It is on, yeah.
It's
for the other.
It's for the recording. Okay. So we were divided all the way up to the last few seconds, and we ultimately chose Rembrandt's. And the major reasons why we were divided is that actually for us, finding the information out from Nath Bose was a lot easier. It was a lot easier to see what she was interested in, her teaching experience, and when you got through the nitty-gritty of Rembrandt's CV, he actually had a lot more experience and a lot more going for him, but it was difficult for us to initially see, at least for two of us. We fell onto the first application. So in the end, what I think made our decision was the vast amount of teaching experience that Rembrandt had, specifically the first university teaching experience where he taught a class of 150 students. He developed and helped do the course investigation, motivation. He lectured, recruited speakers, wrote exams, advised students. So that's a lot for really a PhD student. And he's also been very productive in the teaching area. So that's what ultimately made us choose him over the other applicant.
Okay, great. So a vote for Rembrandt. Terrific. Move on to the next group. Sounds well thought out.
So in our group we also picked the, what's the name called, the
Rembrandt?
Yeah, Rembrandt.
Yeah.
So
The artist.
in the first CV, like at the beginning, I like the format for the first CV, but but people in our group, they have some different opinion on the second one, because the second one really lists the the career of this guy, and it's very, because he is looking for the job that about the or about teaching.
Uh-huh.
So and then there's a lot of teaching stuff at the very beginning, and I guess in the back they have publication, but that's not as important as the teaching experience.
Uh-huh. For Rembrandt.
For
right.
Rembrandt. So then I don't think the publication thing will affect the how good or bad of this CV is.
Got it.
And there's a thing this thing in the first CV that this
So
guy put a lot of
For Bose. Uh-huh.
a lot of poster like research,
Uh-huh.
like not necessarily big things within the last 4 pages.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of annoying.
Uh-huh.
And
Right, so on the Bose CV, there's 4 pages of like every talk this person
yeah,
ever gave
so
forever. Yeah.
For my, in my opinion, I think he just needs to put, he or she just needs to put 1 or 2 that's very important for that and related to his research.
Yeah.
And in the second one, we found this interest section at the very bad, the very last section.
Uh-huh. For Rembrandt?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
and I think that's also the thing we don't understand, like why he put this thing on the CV.
So beekeeping and dancing, like, do you put that on a CV? That's the question.
Because typically people don't do that, right?
It does make it interesting. So despite all that, you still picked Rembrandt, right?
Yeah.
Okay, still picked Rembrandt. Passion for teaching as conveyed, and that sounds like that's the job they really want.
Because we think this guy focused, like he really emphasized on what he get, and that's what he's looking for.
Got it.
Teaching.
Okay. So you're going to hire the beekeeping professor that hasn't published yet. Okay. Okay.
So we actually, I'm not going to stand.
Let's speak up. Can everybody hear? Okay.
Okay. We chose Rembrandt as well for, in addition to some of the reasons that have already been described in his favor, we had a couple of issues with Nath Bose's CV. For one, I think you said it was a she?
Yes.
Okay. So she had a lot of white space in her CV, and for something where you have 2.5 minutes to review it, flipping through every page and trying to garner the most out of the information that she provides was difficult. And then also she had a lot of positions and different things that she had done, but she didn't give much description for a lot of them. So their pertinence to this particular application were unclear. And so we felt that she could improve on making her different experiences relevant to the particular position that she was applying for. And then finally, we liked that she clearly took a lot of pride in the work that she had done in the community, but we wish she had made that more relevant to teaching undergrads, because dealing with 5-year-olds and teaching them science is going to be quite a bit different to teaching teenagers and people in their early 20s, young adults. And you're going to be teaching them much different information. So if she had made a connection between the work that she took pride in and the work that she would be doing for the university, we think it would have improved.
Would have helped that person.
chances
Okay,
a bit.
great.
Next.
So I think those are we focused a lot so far on the other groups on Rembrandt. This is helpful to have the feedback on Bose as well. But so far we have 3 votes for Rembrandt, right? Okay. Something that hasn't been said yet about the
Well,
group.
I'm going to change this voting system. With our group, we actually voted for Bose.
All right, okay.
We believe that she is a better teacher, especially when she explained of how she worked with her project and how the students were motivated. And to me, that shows that, well, at least our group believe that she's a great teacher. But with Rembrandt, though, we do believe that he had a better resume. So it was much more easier to read, and you're like, it's visually appealing, and you're like, this person's well-rounded. But it seemed like it was a lot more embellishment. It's like, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. But with her, she seemed to be more focused on the students and what they learn. And I do believe community is important, because when you are a PI, you will have high school students in your lab during the summer, so you still are working with students that age. So that's pretty much, is that everything? Did I forget? Okay,
Great.
got everything. Short
All
and
right.
sweet.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, so now we're 3 for Rembrandt, 1 for Bose.
Actually, we also vote for Dr. Bose.
All right.
We have
getting close.
3 reasons. The first is the Dr. Bose, the organization is easier to rate, given the very limited 2.5 minutes than Rembrandt. The second reason is even Rembrandt has more experience, like research. And he has Nature journal, right? First author Nature journal. But we think
Does he? Does he?
Submit. Okay. And
Submit.
But Dr. Bose, clearly she does a better job presenting herself, and very clear what she wants to do, especially in the cover letter.
Bose.
Yeah. And the third reason is Dr. Bose has individual teaching experience. She develops develops the course and lab by herself and interacts with the students very effectively. Yeah, that's the reason.
Okay, great. I'll weigh in with some opinions at the end, but it's getting close. We have 3 for Rembrandt, 2 for Bose. Thanks for your points. Next group.
So what? I don't know. It's working.
I think we can hear you. Just speak loud.
Dr. Bose's application was she.
Yeah. Oh.
So that she has shown. Yeah, but I was just highlighting. Right. So she's shown the ability to engage students through her lab exercise, and the experience of teaching at San Domingo for one spring. But we eventually went with Rembrandt.
Okay. Psych.
And Dr. Bose has a letter of reference from a Nobel laureate, the C.V. Raman. But we went with Rembrandt because what we saw was the CV was better to read, and the teaching experience was highlighted in the first page. And there's a list. There's attention to pedagogy, where she's shown motivation and things like that matter to teaching a diverse group of students. So that shows some experience in learning and teaching. So that's why we went together with Rembrandt.
Great. Okay. So 4 for Rembrandt, 2 for Bose. I think we have. Oh, they said it's listed. Is it listed as Nobel laureate? Oh.
I mean, C.V. Raman is Nobel laureate.
Oh, got it. It is a famous. Okay. I thought it said Nobel laureate. Wow. You knew that.
It's very sad. Like Usain Bolt did not have PhD. He basically had mastered.
Wait, you mean Rembrandt? Rembrandt doesn't have a PhD.
Yeah, is that the actual Asian Bose?
Hang on. This let's hear back from this group first. Yeah.
Okay, so we also chose Rembrandt. Basically, the thing we think they're both highly qualified, like for teaching, but we didn't really like how on Bose's CV she has her honors and awards first on that front page, whereas his teaching experience is what you see first on his CV. But as far as like whose CV was more organized, we were very split on that. I thought Rembrandt's was much easier to read and more organized than Bose's, but like we all had very different opinions on that. And then also his cover letter, we thought tailored more to the Fantastic College. Like he links like what he's done to what they,
what their priorities
uses
are.
Their name and their mission, or just kind of links more to that college and how he would be a part of that university. So yeah, everything else has pretty much already been said. But
great point. Okay.
So we went with Rembrandt.
So I think Rembrandt won, but let's hear from the last group. Anyhow, is there anything? Oh, you chose Bose? All right. Okay. Still shaking it up at the end. Something different about why you chose Bose or didn't choose Rembrandt.
Yeah, so I think first off, so I think this is very interesting too, that almost the exact same reasons for each are opposite for people who chose which one. So we thought that Bose's was easier to read and more tailored to the actual position, which is focused on undergraduate teaching, and we thought that she reflected that more. And one thing that wasn't said is, and that is something that you might not appreciate so much just thinking about it first off, is that the way that the cover letter is written kind of colored how we viewed the rest of the application. So it seems as if Bose really expressed she conveyed her contribution, what her contribution would be to the position, rather than just focusing on listing qualifications of herself like the other one did. So the Picasso one, he was just talking about himself the whole time, and she kind of was talking about what her contribution would be and what her passions are.
Bose, you mean Bose was more?
Bose did that more effectively, and I thought that the way that the Picasso one wrote his cover letter kind of turned me off, at least, to the rest of the application, because I was like, okay, this guy.
Too much selling. Okay.
And it just there were grammatical errors also in the Picasso one, so it was very wordy. There were grammatical errors. It didn't really clearly convey all of his qualifications and credentials, although we did agree with other people that his qualifications and credentials did seem a little better than hers. So regardless of that, we still chose Bose because we thought that she seemed to be more dedicated to teaching and had more evidence for that in the development of her own little program in her lab and everything. So
great. Okay. So I got, if I didn't lose count, 5 for Rembrandt, 3 for Bose, might have been 4, but at any rate, Rembrandt came out slightly ahead. So what's the answer from this? What takeaway points should you have? First of all, so this is a fake exercise, as you know, but they were real CVs taken from 2 former trainees from UCSF who were both successful at getting faculty job offers in very competitive environments. So both places, both undergraduate institutions that are highly competitive, draw hundreds of applicants for their faculty positions, and both of these people got job offers. So, so there is no answer, I guess. But I think a few takeaway points would be, one is how easy it is to miss things in a document when you're reading it really fast, but how useful the committee process is at catching these things. So I think I heard a couple of people, and you probably noticed in all your committees, talk about how you missed one thing where some other people picked it up. So that's the process itself is hopefully a demonstration of how it works, which should be comforting to you as an applicant. I think that if multiple people are eventually going to read this document and help come to a consensus. So everything in the document doesn't have to be perfectly organized, and people will still get some information from it. Another point is, again, how maybe the same point, how easy it is to miss things. So the Rembrandt one, this person actually hasn't graduated yet, right? Technically, they're just finishing. And how many papers do they have? 2. How many papers they published? 0, right? They've actually published 0 papers yet. And you don't know the abstract, but so how many research manuscripts have they published? 0, right? So then, and another thing about, I won't say which is my favorite, I'll just point a couple things out. A thing about Picasso, Rembrandt, the one written to Picasso from Rembrandt, every time I've done this exercise, someone notes the salesman-like language that the person uses, and generally the perception is that this much selling is overkill. And with a teaching award and all the teaching this person's done, they could have toned it down a little bit and still been successful at putting themselves out there as a great teacher. But language like my crowning achievement, that's somewhere in the like you're just finishing your degree. Is that the last thing you're going to do in your whole? That language strikes people as a little bit over top, especially when you combine it with the fact that they probably should have in their publication section written, clearly made it, manuscripts in preparation, manuscripts submitted. You want to have headings if you're going to include those things in there. The comment I'll make about Bose is that she, I think, in the CV part, I think the cover letter is quite good. The CV is kind of great example of underselling. So I knew this person, if you really understood what she did at University of San Domingo, she undersold this. This was created a course from scratch. The other person just taught a course. So if you're thinking about the usefulness of curriculum development and having developed this whole thing from scratch, she could have done a lot better job of really promoting how useful that was, how like that experience was to the kind of position she'd have at teaching independently at a private liberal arts college. Questions about that? Anything?
I noticed that both of these applications are quite long. One of them was 7 pages and the other one was 12 pages. Would there be like an optimal number of pages that an applicant should be aiming for?
Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, how long is too long? I think layout makes all the difference. Like the format that Bose chose. Some people noted that it seems like too much white space. Other people noted they thought it made it easier to skim. I actually think it probably makes it easier for the 10-second read to have it this much white space and have the headings really stick out like she did, as opposed to the Rembrandt one where you really have to spend a little more time to pick out the different sections. And yet, a lot of people do find the Rembrandt one more engaging to read and more interesting to read once they spend the time on it. So I think the other thing that has been noted about Bose is how she put in like every talk she ever did, which I think is probably overkill. So she probably could have gotten rid of a couple pages, right, just by being a little more discriminating with the talks that she presented. So I don't think there's an answer to the question. It depends on the format. And I would say most committees would not say that 7 pages is too long, or even 12 if you count all this. So I think it totally depends on the format you choose. Other questions? Uh-huh. Okay.
When people list academic positions, how much description is normally given for what they're actually looking for? So there's a lot of focus on...
when an institution posts a job description, what do they typically say?
And how much detail can they give about what they're looking for?
I would say, as a trend, it seems like the bigger the institution, the less they say almost. And which is why your network is really important. So I would say that a lot of big research places, when I've read job descriptions, it seems like they sometimes don't say a whole lot. Like, we're looking for someone this background and this focus in terms of their future research. But it seems like a lot of the teaching-focused institutions actually will say quite a bit. But it's always useful to find somebody at the institution and say, I think I'm well qualified for this position, I'd like to apply. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about what the department's looking for, and see if you can get some coaching before you apply? It's always useful. So we'll wrap up in about the next 10 or 15 minutes, and I'll give you a break before we talk about startup packages. But I thought I'd say a few things quickly about formatting, and then move on to some of the other types of documents that you might be asked to submit. And one thing is kind of just to overkill the previous points about layout and making it easy to skim. You'll also see that this front page of your CV is prime real estate, and don't waste it on things that nobody knows what they mean. So you'll see this is the older version of the NATH-BOES resume. Honors and awards were first. I would assume that if that's the first section on the first page of your resume, the first major section, that this is something that's really important, but we don't know what that is. So be careful that you explain things and have a reason for where you put everything on your CV. I have some in the slides that have been distributed. There's a few slides about how people might describe their various experience sections. So if you're applying for a position where everyone reading your CV may not be from your subspecialty field, you might need to describe your research a little bit, and so this is an example of how it might be done. Likewise, for your teaching experience, if you take some extra space to describe what that's about, don't simply say, I taught biology 102 and microbiology 204 when nobody knows what those are. Do some descriptive, what's the scope of the courses that you taught and the size of the course, and then really importantly, have a bullet in there about how you were as a teacher. If you have a teaching statement, you'll probably also be able to talk about that in your teaching statement. But in your CV, even say something about course evaluation process, or feedback I received from my teaching supervisor pointed out my ability to do this or that. Extra slides in here that I'll kind of run through quickly. Always highlight your name in the publication history. And now we're going to jump into research statements, teaching statements, and letters of recommendation as we wrap up. And for teaching statements, just pay attention closely to what's asked for. Is it a teaching philosophy statement? Is it a statement of teaching interests? These might be very different. If it's a teaching philosophy statement, go light on the philosophy. This is what faculty tell us. Like, sometimes they read, a page and a half of academic information about pedagogy and how teaching should be done. But really what the readers want to see is a little bit about your philosophy. So how do you approach teaching? And then some examples from your one-on-one mentoring, from your classroom teaching, from facilitations that you've done that describe how you incorporate that philosophy into your actual teaching. If it's a statement of teaching interests, be careful not to simply focus on the upper level courses that you would love to teach because everybody's so motivated. Realize that for any starting faculty member, you'll probably, it would be a good idea, it would be a smart political thing to do to talk about, service level courses that you also want to teach, because they're probably going to give you some, 101 level classes at the beginning of your career. And again, there's instructions and samples for teaching statements on our office website. And then I'll say a little more about research statements. It's a little bit like grant writing, I suppose. You want to engage the reader and make them think that your future research is exciting, is important, is fundable, must be done. So a little bit like the opening sections of your grants. And if you're going to apply to a place where there's undergraduates, that you can do research with your undergraduates. And there's on Science Careers, in their academic career toolkit, there's a writer who interviewed 40 department chairs at different types of institutions from all kinds of different disciplines. And basically he said, sort of like a grant proposal, your research statement should be a readable, compelling agenda that fits well with the needs, facilities, and goals of the department and answers the question, why must this work be done? So in the first 5 years of your career, what must be done? Or what are you going to do and why must it be done? Expectations seem to vary greatly by discipline. We've even seen that at UCSF. People with chemistry backgrounds write longer ones than people with life science backgrounds. The best thing to do is get some samples from people who have recently been on the job market and read their research statements before you start drafting yours. It'll be a lot less detailed than a grant proposal, obviously if you only have a couple pages, but it should describe how you're going to start your career, how you're going to get to the point at least where you're funded, and then a little bit about what you're going to do with the rest of your long-term vision. Let's see. This was an interesting comment from, we had a science writer in our office for a while, Françoise Chenu, who read a lot of these research statements, and she said a lot of people make the mistake of they sound like postdocs as they're writing this, and what you want to do is start to sound like a future faculty member, a leader, a visionary who's going to really move a field forward, not do the next set of experiments. And then in terms of layout or how these things are structured, typically you'd have the title that's really going to be succinct, and then sort of an executive summary at the beginning. So here's what I'm going to tell you about myself and what I'm doing, and then sort of go chronologically. So my background, and then my immediate next future, and then long-term goals as well. Making it easy to read with headings and figures. I've read a bunch of these documents, and some people just write 2 pages of nonstop text, unformatted almost. And make sure you have figures, lots of headings, so that someone who doesn't want to read the document can pick out which paragraphs they do want to read. And use lots of signal language. First instructional or introductional language for yourself. Things that make people want to read, like we know a lot about this, but here's the gap I'm going to address, etc. So here's some examples of language here that we don't have to go all into. And then remember to tailor it to the type of institution. So find out as much as you can about what type of department you're in, the equipment that they have, what's available, and then make sure the reader can understand that you can do that work at that institution or in that department. And then it seems most useful to stage this process. So don't try to create a perfect document at the beginning. Just scratch down a few ideas and get feedback on those from your PI, from other mentors, colleagues, people in your field that you want to that you want to work with in the future. And then take that feedback and try to draft something, and then get more feedback on it from additional people. But if you try to do the whole thing at once, it's just going to get frustrating. And then when you have reference letter writers, make sure that they also refer to your future research, that you're the right person to do it. If you can get your PI to say that they know that you're proposing this work and they're supportive of that, that can be really helpful. Or even that person or your letter writers will want to collaborate with you in the future. If you go to our office website and move to the section on developing a research statement, there's a checklist on the website that people seem to find really useful for this feedback getting process. And it's broken into the content and the layout and structure. So passing your draft to a colleague or a PI and just saying, hey, will you read this and give me feedback, often gets you unstructured feedback. But if you use this sort of checklist, say, can you focus on these things about what I'm proposing and then how I'm proposing it, you might get a little more structured feedback. And I'll just wrap up by talking a bit about letters of reference. Usually, in most of the job postings we read, people requested 3, and most people say it's best to get your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor, and some collaborator or future collaborator or other research mentor. If you're applying to an institution where teaching is going to be important, one of these people should be replaced with someone who, one way or another, someone has to talk about your teaching skill and ability. And if it's someone who's seen you teach, it'll be a lot more credible. And then this is super important. Even if it's uncomfortable, when you ask people to write you a letter of recommendation or provide a reference for you, I think you should use this language. Can I count on you to provide a positive letter of recommendation for me? And the feedback we get from postdocs is, this is uncomfortable because I know my PI really well, and they're going to be insulted if I ask for a positive letter. Of course they're going to write me a positive letter. But there's a small chance that you could apply for positions and nobody calls you. You're like, I think I should have gotten calls for these. I wonder if one of my letters is not good. And then how do you find that out? You could ask the committee members, but that's awkward too, right? So I think it's less awkward to ask for a positive letter in this language and have that person say, of course I'll write you a letter. It's almost insulting that you asked. Better to have that than to wonder what's being said about you if you're not getting the interviews you think you would receive. And you're doing this person a favor you're doing yourself a favor. They're doing you a favor if they say, I don't think I'm prepared to talk about this part of your background enough. Maybe you should find someone else. Or if they just say, you should find another recommender. That's a huge favor rather than having a lukewarm letter or a negative letter out there about you, even though it's a kind of a painful process. So do this, avoid trouble in the future. And then after this person says, of course I'll be happy to write letters for you, set a meeting with them or get them some kind of documentation if you can't meet with them that provides material that will help them write a good letter for you, including the types of job postings you're applying for, a copy of your CV, your research or teaching statements. If you haven't talked to that person for a long time, refer to your papers. And then this is really useful. Prepare them some sort of a outline. Tell them, I'll be happy to provide an outline for you, and then on your own, sit down and think, go back to these two questions, what points do I want to stress about myself, and what might be perceived as my weaknesses and then think about your recommenders, and how can each of those people underscore my strengths or counter my weaknesses, and divide up those points so that you're writing 3 different outlines for 3 different people, and in the end these people get to cover all your strengths and weaknesses. This is probably the best strategy I can think of to make sure that your letters are really giving a good, well-rounded support for you. Lots of people have heard this probably. Hey, will you write a letter for me? Oh, draft your own and I'll sign it. This sounds like a burden, and it kind of is, because it's hard to write a letter that, if you talk to a lot of recommenders who've written a lot of these senior faculty members, they'll say, I start out by saying this is one of the best postdocs I've ever worked with this skill area, or this person is in the top 1% of this field. And you're not going to feel comfortable writing that about yourself, right? Especially 3 times. If someone in a workshop, somebody said, all of my recommenders asked me to write my own letter. And so it's hard to brag on ourselves in writing like that, especially, although Rembrandt seemed to not have a problem. But you have to do that. And so don't undersell yourself in these letters if you're asked to write your own. And this can be really useful. Howard Hughes has a website that's written for faculty members who are thinking, junior faculty members are like, I have to start writing letters. How do I do that? But you should go there too and say, if my PI is asking me to write a letter, here's some structure and advice on how the best letters are written. So to kind of wrap it up, you can see how much work this is. There's tons of all these different documents, and you need to talk to people and get letters and do your networking. Start early. Prepare your materials in a way that are going to be tailorable, and get ready to spend lots of time on each application. Realize it's a team effort, and make best use of your mentors and department assistants and other people you've gotten to know who can help you through this process. Take an organized approach to it and try to enjoy it. Most people on the other side of it, after they're successful, were like, this was really interesting, learning about myself, helped me grow as a professional to move myself on to the next stage. And then finally, lots of resources that we've compiled over the years at our office website. So I'm going to stop and give everybody a break now. Why don't we come back at 11:15 and we'll talk about negotiations for faculty startups. Great. So we're going to move on to the other end of this process. So you go through all this work to get a job, and now you've got a job offer. I thought I'd talk a little about what people can negotiate for and how. So you'll have this complicated process where you're going to go through a series of discussions with a department chair, and the slides that I have, the work I have is mostly focused on research institutions, because it's much more complicated when you're getting a job at a primarily undergraduate institution, especially if there's only teaching. It's a very quick process. And you would follow the general format that I'm talking about, but you wouldn't have to go back and forth on different pieces of equipment and that sort of thing. So most of this is focused on how people have done it at research institutions. There's sort of two parts. We'll talk some about what people negotiate for. And this is what, when people come into our office for appointments, it's almost always about this. They offered me, this much money, this much space, this type of equipment, but I think I'm going to need something more. What's typical, and is this competitive? But then, as we go through the discussion, we almost find that what's most scary for people is really the how part. So not just what do I ask for, but how I actually approach the process, and what do I say that will maintain the relationship I have with this future colleague, and still gets me what I want. So we'll talk about both of those things, what it is to ask for, and then the process, how you ask for it. And I have some samples that we'll also look at. So first of all, we'll kind of break this up into several sections. One is salary, compensation, other personal benefits, so things that you want for yourself in the process. And people always ask what's competitive in terms of salaries. It varies greatly by institution type, by geography, but there's some information that you can start finding out. You could go to the Chronicle of Higher Education, and they do an annual salary survey with the American Association for University Professors. That's institution by institution and rank. So at Bard College in New York, what's the average full professor, associate professor, and assistant professor salaries? It's not really by discipline, for at least I haven't looked for a year or so, but I don't believe they've started doing it by discipline or department yet. It would be too detailed, I suppose. But you can at least get a general idea of what institutions pay. Medical school salaries are not included in the Chronicle of Higher Education, so you wouldn't be able to look up UCSF, where I work, and find details on that. But medical salary surveys are published by the American Association of Medical Colleges. They do an annual salary survey as well that's actually quite sliced and diced by, so they'll say the average faculty in regions, so they don't go institution by institution, but in the western region of the country, what do assistant professors make in PhD assistant professors in a clinical department, or MD professors in a clinical department or basic science department. So they have it quite sliced and diced. This information you have to pay for, but I would bet the libraries here probably have access to this. What is very useful is if you're interviewing, getting a job offer from a state institution. Most states now publish all of their salaries by person. So you could say, okay, who's someone in the department who's been there a couple years now? I can look up that person's actual compensation and see how the offer compares to that person. So that's probably the most useful piece of information there. Salary structures can be really complex, 9-month versus 12 months. So you'll see a position posting that says this is a 9-month salary. That means, and that's typically at tuition-driven undergraduate institutions where the colleges are just have the summers off typically, or professors may have the summers off. And so in that case, you'll want to replace the 3 months of salary with funding that you bring in yourself, or so you do extra teaching, or you have time for grant-supported activities during the summer. But for junior professor, this is something you'd want to negotiate for in the process is, so for my first few years while I'm getting started up, can you guarantee that I'll have some sort of way to supplement my salary during the summer? And that department chair will have a conversation with you about how that could happen then. In a large university system, they'll have different things that you can look up on the academic personnel website. So you should always visit the academic faculty handbook at a university, which is probably posted, it's always posted on a university's website somewhere. And they'll have, assistant professor, associate professor, full professor, so it'll vary, salaries will vary by rank. There may be different scales for people in medical schools versus, so if you're in a life science related department in a medical school within a big university, and a life science department in a School of Arts and Sciences in the same university, the salaries may be different, which is interesting. There may be steps within a salary for within the rank, so every year and a half you may be up for promotion to the next step, even though you're not getting promoted from assistant to associate professor yet, et cetera. So then there's there's add-ons in the UC system. There's X, Y, and Z factors, which all have to do with different things that you could negotiate for, consulting money, taking on administrative responsibilities, et cetera. So it could be very complicated. You should read about those in the academic handbook because it's going to be different. And then you'll see from this sample letter that we just redacted with permission from the person, they talk about the compensation package, and then you can see how there's a base salary, health sciences compensation plan salary, the negotiated salary, all these different types of salary components are all kind of listed in this job offer letter from one of the UC schools. And it would be different but similarly complex at any big university. So this is why you should read about this probably before you get the job offer. And then in addition, there's lots of other things that might seem trivial. And would I really want to ask for things like a parking space? Well, one of our postdocs found out on his first day of work that his assigned parking deck was a 20-minute walk from his lab, and so there's 40 minutes of commute on foot every day, or taking a campus bus. It was still a long ride, and so he had to go back later and say, can we get something at the parking deck that's next to my building instead of 20 minutes away? But that became something that was more difficult to negotiate for after than it would have been early in the process. Things like moving expenses, housing loan assistance, an extra trip for house hunting, daycare for your child on campus, super important, and at most universities, super hard to get. So ask for it before you say yes to the position, because that's when you have the most power to ask for these things. Spouse or partner appointments, some institutions have programs, especially in more remote parts of the country where they want to attract two bodies because then you're more stable and more likely to stay, as opposed to a single person who in a rural area might want to leave sometime after they partner up. So there might be, you might think in some cases having somebody with you is a detriment to your search, but it actually might be helpful. I've seen that happen. So all these things can be negotiated for, and it's best to ask for these things before you say yes. Also then, general items for your success like release time, or at the beginning of your career when you want to be writing grants, all different kinds of help with your teaching. So maybe you can't get fully released from your teaching, but you could say, can I have a lab section versus lecture at the beginning, or can I be assigned teaching assistants, or can I have a small class because it's going to be less burdensome for grading, etc. So you might ask for a bunch of smaller things if they say they can't release you completely from your teaching. A lot of people ask for release from service, so no committees for the first 2 years because I'm trying to write grants and get my research lab started up. People can ask about timing, slow down the tenure clock. So the faculty handbook says I'll be up for tenure in 5 years, but I have I have family plans that I'm going to be engaging in. Can I slow that down? These things should all be listed. This tenure clock stuff should be listed in a faculty handbook. But this is a very important thing for people who have family plans. Graduate program affiliations, official affiliation can make it easier to recruit students, of course. Other things. Sabbatical, I wouldn't ask for that. Can I have sabbatical in my first year? Probably not the thing you'd want to ask for. But it could be something you want to clarify. And then startup funds, space, and support. What things are typical? Questions that get asked are things that you would be looking for. Is it a lump sum? So some departments will say, here's $500,000 when it's gone. It's gone, but that should be enough, we think, to get your research started up. A big question is your salary or other people's salary included in the package? So if it's a lump sum, what actually goes in there? Is it really everything, or are salaries separated out? Or is it funded exactly from your submitted detailed list? So I've seen this where the department says, we're going to submit a list to us of everything you need, make it as detailed as possible, and we'll provide what's on that list, but that's all. Typically, if you're asked for a list, it's going to be something like reagents, equipment, staff, and research support. We have some samples on our website of people's budgets. But there's an article I'll refer to later on Science Careers website, written by a couple of Emory University professors who say the important thing as you're approaching this negotiation process is, for your research, ask for enough to cover your costs until you're generating another revenue stream in the amount that is going to be required by that institution. So if their process is to have you cover all of your costs, then you need to be raising a lot of money. But until you can do that, you need to ask for enough money to get yourself started. So it's not necessarily about getting the most money, it's about getting enough money to get yourself started. So what do we mean by enough and until? Questions you might ask are, are all my reagents, equipment that I must have, and staff. And if you take a look at, typical postdoc student salary tech costs, it's pretty easy to spend $250,000 a year, even for not a giant lab, just on personnel costs. So these things add up. And then until, you'll want to be asking, how long are these funds available? So if it's a lump sum and I can spend it forever as long as I don't go over that budget, great. But otherwise, are there time limits on the spending? I've seen also people talk about, this is a big question to ask if it's not clear in the job offer letter. If you get funding, do you lose? Do they take money away from your startup package because you were successful early? So you'd want to probably ask, if I'm successful, this is something you would negotiate for. The offer letter says the money goes away, but I'd like to say, if I'm successful, you should reward me. And so can I, talk about keeping some percentage of that as an incentive? And then are you front-loading the money? So am I going to spend it all up front and then it ramps down? Or is it the other way, because I'll be growing my lab and I'll need more money later? So these are all things that should be sort of clearly defined. And then other types of support that are sometimes written into a job offer letter. What kind of support is available in the department for you in terms of administrative or clerical? Students and postdocs on departmental training grants that would then be potentially free to you because the training grant's covered for it. Core facilities, shared research experiences. These are all things that you could be asking for. And sometimes could be variously important or not. Lab space, this article on Burroughs Wellcome Fund website, I'll refer to that later, says typically, so some program officers at the Burroughs Wellcome Fund actually collected startup letters from some of their new faculty, and when they sort of compiled things, they said usually it's about 1,000 square feet of lab space for most people. But again, it depends on what you need to get started. It's nothing magic about the amount of money or amount of space. But space probably is money at most institutions, so realize if you're asking for more space for your lab, that department chair probably has to cover it on a square foot basis. And so you're probably asking for more money when you ask for more space. And then I've talked to postdocs who would rather have less space in a less nice lab close to colleagues that they're going to work with than have the new lab in the new building far away. So you have to kind of figure out what's important to you in terms of the quality or location of the space. So we'll talk a little bit about the negotiation process then by taking a look at a couple letters that we have. And also this website is what I was speaking of earlier, the Burroughs Wellcome Fund. They have sample letters from some of their fundees, grantees. So this time we're not having a contest. But I have two actual letters to share with you. Thanks. And I think we'll just do one letter at a time. So what I'd like for you to do is think about yourself as the person who received, this is this person. I'm told this is pretty typical, that when the job offers come, there's generally two ways that it happens. One is you get a call or an email from the department chair, and they say, why don't you tell us what you're going to need? Everybody's really excited about you. We want to extend you an offer. Send me an email back with what you need. And then the job offer letter, the one that comes from them is generated from this email that you send this person and start chatting with. So in this case, this is an actual letter that, this is pretty old, but in this case, Joe got a job offer from Jane, the department chair, on the phone, who did just that. Tell us what you're going to need to get started, and then we'll start the conversation. And so this is what he wrote back, and my question for you is, what would you do differently? I'll give you a minute or two to read through this. How many people need a little more time? Raise your hand. Okay, a few of you. Okay, we'll discuss in about 30 seconds. Interesting. Do you like it? It didn't go well. Okay, so if you were Joe, and you were given this admittedly difficult assignment but apparently fairly typical. That's why we use this, where the department doesn't tell you what they're going to do. They don't throw out something to begin with. They ask you to give the opening shot. What would you do differently?
It would be nice to have a table
Should we use the mic?
costs broken down and sorted by personnel, supplies, equipment, space.
Yes.
So that it's easy to follow and see like subtotals for each thing.
Yes, I agree. There's on our website, there's some samples like this, but exactly, you should have some sort of an Excel table with more detail in this and actual prices. So a lot of the things where he didn't sort of even bother to price out, which probably isn't that helpful to the chair who's, if you think about it from the chair's perspective, they're very dollar driven. No matter what system they have, it's all like, can I get this person for, and can I help them succeed? This is not an adversarial conversation, but can I get this new person to succeed for as little money as I can, basically, which is understandable. But if you don't even tell them what you need in terms of dollars, then it makes it difficult. So definitely more detail and categorized Excel table. Other things they could have done differently.
This is related, but also I would be very specific. So they didn't list any specifics. It just says, I want a laptop and I want a desktop computer. But there are very cheap, slow desktop computers, and there are very fancy ones. So I would suggest maybe listing the specs and also providing a link to that the exact thing that you want, so that if they don't have it in the budget, they can try and scale it down on their rebuttal to you. Also, he lists a lot of lab equipment, but there's no rationale. So he says, I want all of these things, but does he have the experience to use them? Does he have active grant funding? Are they part of a current research project? So there are a lot of things I would say that I want.
Yes.
But do I actually need them, and can I justify them to the department?
This is the word. So a budget justification. A budget should probably include, not for every item perhaps, but some sort of a justification why you need that, or refer to it in your offer letter. As we discussed when I visited, this is necessary for this activity. So some justification, especially for the larger items. Great point.
So thinking in the line of what the NIH makes us write for budget justifications, coming at it from that point of view, I mean, they obviously write NIH grants, so that'd be something they'd used to. Would that be kind of a good idea, making it look like that?
Sure, yeah, I think that maybe not in modular format, like the NIH allows people to put chunks of money, but that kind of approach with that level, with that eye toward detail would be useful, I think.
So I would also want to know how big he expected his lab to be, because he's asking for tons of things, including a couple different personnel things, and he doesn't give any kind of idea of how big he's anticipating the lab to be, or he says what's standard, but with all of this equipment and the office space that he's requesting, I just think it would be helpful to have a bit of a relative statement of, oh, I'm anticipating the lab to be 10 to 12 people, or how,
Without, totally agree. The personnel references are built in several places, and it's confusing, and you don't know what's for him and what's for other people. So yeah, not clear at all. Anything else?
There's no mention anywhere. There's no mention anywhere of the number of grad students or anything involved with that at all. And having students the first couple of years, I mean, he probably won't have much money to support them on his own, and so he needs some sort of departmental support or something like that.
Agreed. And it's not clear. How about his language? That strikes a couple of people as not quite right. It's maybe a little bit entitled. I shouldn't be penalized. Maybe that's language you might use in a conversation later in the process, but I wouldn't focus. It sounds like he's expecting them to screw him over, and that's just not the best way to start the whole conversation. So there's a little bit of entitledness. Okay, so, one more.
Are all of these things would you consider appropriate to ask for, or anything that's inappropriate?
Well, so as I mentioned, most people probably don't ask for desktop computers. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that's like, I would say
it's old.
The minutia detail is probably excessive, but anything like that is kind of big, that's inappropriate.
Well, so in interest of time, I didn't bring this with me, but we have the dean's response letter with Jane's response back to, or the department chair's response back to Joe from this actual scenario that happened. And she, so this was a long time ago, he asked for $100,000 salary. The actual stated salary on all the websites for the entry-level professor was like $65,000. This is 10 years ago. So he overshot it by a whole lot. So $100,000 would be reasonable now, but this was a long time ago. So she was like, if you read the faculty handbook, you would know what our salaries are, and we're not able to give you that much. So I don't know if any of these are unreasonable, but he should have done his research at least on the salary piece of it. And we'll move on to another letter, but the outcome of this was that it started out kind of contentious because of his tone mostly, and the fact that he didn't do his research. On the other hand, it's a hard assignment, and she could have probably given him a few tips at the beginning on how to do it, because it was literally a phone call, tell us what you need, and he was starting from a blank slate on that. So difficult assignment, but it might be what you get. We have a couple department chairs at UCSF who have told us that's what they do, and it started out that way. So it ended up they became friends. They negotiated back and forth for like a month. It got more specific and and he ended up doing a better job of presenting what he needed. But they ended up not having it turned out not to be a fit. And I think the whole interview process probably wasn't well structured, and the department didn't really know what they wanted. And so he ended up turning the job offer down and staying on the market for another year before he got a better suited application or a position. I want to move to another letter. So this is probably more often the way I've seen it is you go through all these interviews, and then you get a call that says we're going to give you an offer, and we'll send you a letter and let us know what you think. And this seems to be more typical. And this is a pretty typical offer letter that comes from a process like that. So my question for you here is, what would you start asking the department chair who signed this letter? If you're the applicant now, not the department chair. So you get this letter. What questions would you still have? Raise your hand if you need another minute. Some people, okay, great. We'll wait. Okay, so if you were the postdoc candidate receiving this job offer letter, what things would you want to know more about? What do you think you should get more of? What points of clarification would you want to ask the department chair in this probably phone conversation that you would have?
So the timelines for some of the salary support specifically? The timelines for the salary support, both for the PI and other personnel, are really vague. There are a lot of statements like, until you can pick this up on other funding, is there a time limit for that? Is that up until 3 years and then it's all done? Or, so those, I don't know, more specific details in the wording of those sections.
So when you were talking to the department chair, you'd ask for clarification or
specifically, you know, can you guarantee this through
tighten it up a little bit.
X number of years or?
In general, I would say this is a very generous offer letter. If you, they're eventually, even at after the startup period, they're going to still cover 70% of this person's salary, right? And that seems to be pre-tenure even. So this is unusually generous. Not to go too much into it myself, but what I always think of when I see this letter is the actual person who received this letter initially thought they didn't have anything to compare it to. They thought it was a poor letter, a poor offer because it's only $200,000, and this person came into the office and he's like, I know somebody at this other institution who's in my similar field, and they got like $800,000 job offer, or $800,000 package. But this is why you should not compare yourself to others. That other person, like, it was all in. That was salaries, that was, I don't remember everything else, but that was, if you add up everything, it was $800,000. This person has $200,000 plus all these salary lines that are hugely beneficial, and the fact that they're covering 70% of their salary in perpetuity. So when this person really started breaking it down, like, oh, this is a good offer. So yeah.
So I would ask for a little bit of clarification. I don't know what's typical with these things, but I noticed that it's supposedly a 12-month appointment, but they have a lot of descriptions for salaries over the first 3 years. And so a little bit of clarification as far as what was specific for the contract, or like what details about the renewal of the contract, and sort of wanting to make sure that, yes, they're looking at at least a 3-year timeline, but as a formality, they may have a 12-month contract that they sign every year kind of thing.
Yep,
I would just
good
want
point.
more details on that.
So you'd want to ask, what is this process like? It says, I see that it's a 1-year contract, but the 3-year startup package, does every year is a formality, or is there a review process at the end of every year? How does that work? Yeah. Or better yet, I've also read in the faculty handbook that this is how it works. Can you confirm that this is how it works in the department? Because I've also heard at various institutions, sometimes the faculty handbook and what the department chair actually does aren't always in line. So sometimes you want to clarify those things as well.
I'd ask for clarification on exactly where the office space and the laboratory space is, if you'd seen it, especially if one of the reasons why you're going to the institution is some of those core facilities they mentioned, and if it's critical for you to be relatively close to it, like you don't want to walk your cells 14 blocks in the summer heat or something, that kind of stuff.
Yes. Excellent, great. So, and this might be something you talk about. Maybe you haven't seen that in your campus visit, but you ask for a second visit when you're going to be house hunting or something, and can we set up time to review the lab space before I accept the offer to make sure it's going to be sufficient?
I had a question. I noticed there's a lot of language about opting out of teaching and service in favor of research, and for the tenure decision specifically, should there be more clarification about what is required for the tenure review in terms of balance of research, teachings, and service?
I would agree. And some of that you can find in a faculty handbook, but you'd still want to see if that's true in the department. So in the faculty handbook, I see that faculty are assessed on this percentage of teaching, this percentage of research, this percentage of service. Or if that's not listed in the handbook, then you'd want to ask how it's done in the department, but confirm or get more information on it. I agree. So most of these so far, you'll see, I'm noticing the process are sort of points of clarification, which is typically how it works. One more comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say that I would want to know what type of equipment they have in inventory and what's available to use, so that you could be more relative to what you're going to have to spend for.
Yes. Good point. So core facilities, are those, how used are they? Like, are you going to have to sign up 6 months in advance? Do you have to plan out your experiments to access the cores that are listed? How available are they, et cetera? So good points. Yeah, so a lot of times this conversation process, the negotiation actually just starts out with one conversation you may not even be asking for anything except for clarifying all these different things that you want to know about, and then you end the conversation and have another one. Now that I've had a chance to understand everything, here are some things that I think I'm going to need, and that becomes a second or third or fourth conversation. A couple other points that I would want to know about, I think you covered most of them. The point about we're going to cover everything, where does it say? The dollar figures. Under equipment supplies, the department will equip your lab in accordance with the list you provided. The dollar figures are estimates. It's the estimated equipment list that's guaranteed. I probably want to, since it's, I would want to have a conversation about the big items to make sure that we're on the same page, even though the department chair is using this very general language. And then it becomes, in all these cases, it becomes a relationship thing. Do you feel like this person's on your side? Maybe you don't need to nail down every little pipette in the budget if they're saying general language, just because you feel like this is a good person and they're on your side. And that's typically the way. Like if you read any negotiation book, they'll say get everything in writing down to the last detail. And actually, I think that might get annoying in these really detailed. Super detailed processes. So realize that it's a balance between making sure you got what you need and keeping the relationship going. Which kind of brings me to the last part of my workshop, which is mostly designed, I think we covered all these things, mostly designed as a takeaway, as a handout. So I know we only have a few minutes left, but I'll kind of skim through what's in these process slides. And then these are designed with quotes and stuff that people have used or that we recommend, so that when you get your job offer letter, you could go back to this as a handout. That I think these have all been distributed to you now, and sort of use these as a guide. And typically there's some steps involved. Where you'll get the job offer, and then usually the department chair will say some general things about when they want you to start, or what the total package is, and your whole goal is to just say, great news, I feel there's a great fit, and it would be helpful if you can send me what we've discussed in writing so far. This is definitely probably not probably the most important point is don't accept anything in the moment. So the department chair will probably say, how does that sound? And if you're like, great. Then it's like you've accepted a job offer, and it makes it harder to go back and ask for more in the beginning. So just say, don't point out anything that's missing. Don't accept anything that seems even generous. Just say, can you send everything to me in writing, and I'll work quickly to follow up with you. And then you want to decide if you're going to take that job offer, or if you'd like to take the job offer or not. And even if you're likely to take it, the people we talked to or the articles we read said you should be asking for, this should be a process. It shouldn't be they send you an offer, you sign the letter, and it's over. It should be some sort of a step-by-step process, and you'll probably have to go back several times to ask for more things before you finish. And then make a list for yourself, I call it the private list of what it is that you can't succeed without. And that's a deal breaker, and that would mean that if you're going to fail in this job, and you know you're going to fail because maybe it's your only offer, but it's not going to be sufficient for you to succeed, then you either have to change your research plans or turn the job down, as hard as that would be. And then by this time, you'll probably have already shared a public list, so your budget that we've talked about. And then you'll start negotiating. So you'll start out with a positive and enthusiastic comment, and then you'll give an overview of your requests. So this part is important because there are so many things usually in these detailed letters that you're going to ask for and ask about that if you just jump right into it and then you're like another thing, another thing, another thing, the person gets fatigued. So if you front load it by giving the agenda, well, there's 3 items I have to ask about for equipment and 2 items for this. And I recognize we might not get through all of this in one conversation. Then the person is less likely to get fatigued. Jump into your first request and realize that you don't have to finish everything in that first conversation. Maybe there's a stopping point where the department chair has said, I have to go check on this or that. You know, you've asked for a spot in the daycare. I'm going to have to make some calls about that. But you don't want to accept the job without that. So that's when you would stop and say, well, maybe this is a good stopping point. When you get an answer to that, I'm happy to move on. And so I'll just kind of wrap up by giving you a guide through this. Starting out with a positive, enthusiastic comment, that's important to sort of just set the tone. I want to say how thrilled I am to have received this offer. I do have a number of questions. They run the gamut from salary issues, so this is your agenda setting process, to whether or not my husband will find a job there, how I'm going to access necessary equipment, or I've got a couple main points. The email you sent to me, is this a good time to discuss all of these, or do you prefer to divide it up, or do some things by email? And then, as we discussed previously, in order for me to be successful with this project, I need a flux capacitor, which the department does not currently own. Purchasing this piece of equipment from my startup funds would compromise my ability to hire the research staff I'll need to move forward. So if you don't give me this equipment, if I have to buy the equipment, I can't hire the people to run it. I just don't see how I can succeed if I have to purchase it from my startup funds. I'm wondering, is there any other way to be covered by other funds? And then recognize that if you're doing this by email, you can kind of meter out the requests and do these things, but sometimes you'll have to do that again, like I said, in conversation. And so, I feel like at a point where I need to back up and look at everything we've discussed. It seems encouraging so far, though. Can we agree on to talk about these 3 points at a later time after you've had the chance to accept, check on this, et cetera. And then, at these stopping points, you might also say, I really appreciate your flexibility on these 3 items. I'm aware of how much it takes to request an approval for me to move my salary to step 2. I feel like we made a lot of progress. I'm looking forward to the possibility of finishing this up. I'll recalculate my reagent budget as you requested and get back to you by tomorrow. What happens from here on your end? So this is a verbal recap of everything that you've discussed so far on the most important points. They have to do some things, you have to do some things, but you'd also want to probably put that in writing, and that could be even after this, even after the steps of the conversation. So if the department chair doesn't write you a note saying, here's the things that I think we discussed, you'd probably want to write them a note and say, thanks for the conversation today, here's a bulleted things of where we agreed on, here's a few things we agreed we still have to talk about. And then when you're done, also get everything in writing. And just to wrap it up, It's not about getting the most money. It's about getting what you need to get started for long enough. Make sure that every time you talk about this, you start the conversation, you start out with something positive, and always express appreciation, because it's a lot of work for this department chair to go around the department or the faculty or different parts of the university and ask for the things that you've asked for. So express appreciation for those, and then do everything, at least at the end, get a formal letter of everything that you've agreed on in writing. So that's all I have. I think we're going to break, and for those of you coming back for biotech chats, we'll do that at 12:30, is that right? Or 1? I forget what time. I think we have an hour for lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, hour for lunch. So we'll be back at 1 for those of you doing biotech. Otherwise, I'll stick around for questions, and thanks for being a great group to work with.
Yes, thank you for coming, and this informative and interactive workshop. It was really great.
Thank you.